Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. The drive to Pennsylvania took us nearly 6 hours, but Kevin and I desperately needed this getaway. We'd been drifting apart for months, both buried in our careers, barely talking beyond logistics about bills and groceries. The lake house rental seemed perfect when I found it online. Isolated, no Wi-Fi, just us and nature for a long weekend in early November. The owner, Mr. Garrett, met us at a gas station 20 miles from the property to hand over the keys. He was maybe 60, wearing a faded flannel shirt with paint stains, and he kept scratching at this peculiar scar that ran from his left ear down to his jaw. He mentioned storm season was starting, but assured us the house had weathered worse. The way he counted the cash twice and avoided eye contact should have bothered me more than it did. The property was more remote than the photos suggested. The last 4 miles were just dirt road, cutting through dense forest, no other houses visible anywhere. The lake house itself was older too, with dark wood siding that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Kevin immediately loved the rustic charm, especially the wraparound porch with its heavy wooden railings. Inside, everything was functional but dated. Wood-paneled walls, a stone fireplace, furniture that looked inherited rather than purchased. The windows had thick shutters on the inside, which I thought was odd for a rental. While Kevin unloaded our bags, I noticed scratch marks on the inside of the front door, deep grooves near the handle like someone had clawed at the wood. The bedroom upstairs had a strange smell too, not mold exactly, but something organic and unsettling, like old sweat mixed with fear. Friday evening started peacefully enough. We cooked dinner together for the first time in months, just pasta and jarred sauce, but it felt like progress. The storm rolled in around 8, faster than expected. First came the wind, making the whole house creak like an old ship. Then the rain, hitting the window so hard it sounded like someone throwing handfuls of gravel. Kevin opened a bottle of wine and we sat by the fireplace, actually talking, really talking, about things that mattered. The thunder started around 9:30, these deep rolling crashes that you could feel in your chest. Between strikes, the house would go completely quiet except for the rain. And in those moments, I kept hearing something else, a rhythmic creaking from the porch, too regular to be wind. When I mentioned it to Kevin, he laughed and said, "Old houses make noise." But I noticed he kept glancing toward the windows too. The power died at exactly 10:47. I remember because I was checking my phone for signal when the lights went out. Complete darkness swallowed everything instantly. Kevin fumbled for his phone's flashlight while I tried the light switch several times. That pointless reflex we all have. The rain was coming down even harder now, drumming against the roof like it wanted inside. We had seen candles in the kitchen earlier, and Kevin went to get them while I stayed by the dying fire. That's when I heard it clearly. Footsteps on the porch, slow and deliberate, stopping right outside the front door. Not the random creaking from before, but the distinct sound of boots on wet wood. I called out to Kevin, trying to keep my voice steady, and he came back with 3 candles and a box of matches. I told him someone was outside, and we both stood there in the flickering candlelight, listening to the footsteps continue around the side of the house. Kevin grabbed the fireplace poker and moved toward the front door, trying to look through the peephole, but it was too dark outside to see anything. The footsteps had stopped somewhere near the back of the house. We waited, breathing shallow, rain pounding overhead. Then we heard it, the unmistakable sound of hammering. Slow, methodical strikes like someone driving nails into wood. Kevin tried the door handle just to make sure it was locked, but when he twisted it and pulled, the door wouldn't budge. Not locked from our side, it wouldn't open at all. He pulled harder, putting his weight into it, and that's when we realized the door was somehow secured from the outside. The hammering continued, now from a different spot, maybe near the kitchen window. I ran to check the back door while Kevin kept yanking on the front. Same thing. The handle turned, the lock clicked open, but the door itself wouldn't move an inch, like something was barricading it from outside. The next 20 minutes were pure panic disguised as problem-solving. We tried every window on the ground floor, and each one had been fitted with boards from the outside. We could see the edges where they met the frame when we held the candles close. The shutters I'd noticed earlier were on the inside, useless for keeping anyone out but perfect for hiding what was being done to the windows from outside. Kevin tried calling 911, but we had no signal, not even a single bar. The landline we'd seen in the kitchen turned out to be just decorative, not connected to anything. The hammering had stopped, replaced by something worse, the sound of heavy furniture being dragged across the porch. We could hear it clearly through the walls, these long, scraping sounds like someone positioning something large against the doors. Between thunder crashes, we heard whistling, just a casual, cheerful tune like someone doing yard work on a sunny day, completely at odds with what was happening. Kevin decided we needed to try the second-floor windows. We grabbed the candles and rushed upstairs, our shadows dancing wildly on the wood-paneled walls. The master bedroom window faced the lake. If we could break it and jump, it was maybe a 12-foot drop to the ground. Kevin grabbed the bedside lamp and swung it hard against the glass. The window shattered, but behind it was plywood, already nailed in place from outside. He hit it again and again, the lamp base denting the wood but not breaking through. That's when we heard footsteps directly above us on the roof. Slow, careful steps like someone checking their work. Then a man's voice, muffled by the rain but clear enough. "No point wearing yourselves out. Storm's supposed to last until morning." The casualness in his tone made my whole body go rigid. This wasn't random. This person had done this before, had a system, knew exactly how long the storm would last and how long we'd be trapped. I grabbed Kevin's arm and pulled him back downstairs, my mind racing through options. The basement. We hadn't checked the basement. There might be a storm door or cellar entrance. The door to the basement was in the hallway near the kitchen, and we practically fell down the wooden steps in our rush. The basement was unfinished, just concrete walls and exposed beams lit by our phone flashlights. No windows, no doors, just stored furniture covered in sheets and an old water heater. But in the corner, I spotted something that made my heart race. An old coal chute, a metal door about 3 feet square built into the foundation. Kevin ran over and pushed on it. It moved slightly, not boarded up yet. We could hear the footsteps above us now inside the house, walking through the rooms we'd just left. The person wasn't hurrying, just walking room to room like they were doing an inspection. Kevin shoved the coal chute harder, and it scraped open about a foot before hitting something outside. Probably dirt and leaves from years of neglect. The footsteps stopped directly above us. Then we heard dragging sounds again. He was moving something heavy across the floor, positioning it over the basement door. Kevin was frantically digging at the debris, blocking the coal chute with his bare hands, dirt falling back into the basement. I found a piece of broken lumber and started helping him clear the opening. The metal door was rusted and sharp around the edges, cutting into our hands as we worked. Above us, the man started talking again, his voice conversational like he was chatting with old friends. Gary and his wife tried the coal chute too, about 3 years back. Made it halfway out before I noticed. The Nguyens just hid in the bedroom closet, found them in under an hour. You folks are doing better than most. The revelation that we weren't the first hit me like ice water. This house, this rental, it was all a trap. How many times had Mr. Garrett met desperate couples at that gas station, counted their cash, given them directions to this nightmare? Kevin managed to clear enough space to squeeze through, though the opening was barely wide enough for a person. He went first, his shoulders scraping against the rusty metal, rain immediately soaking him as his upper body emerged outside. I heard him grunt, pulling himself forward. Then suddenly he screamed, not in pain, but in fury. "There's a chain," he yelled back, his voice strained. "My ankle. There's a chain attached to something." I could hear him thrashing, trying to pull free. The footsteps upstairs moved quickly now, no longer casual. Heavy boots thundered across the floor toward the basement door. I pushed myself into the coal chute behind Kevin, feeling the sharp metal tear through my shirt, my skin. His legs were blocking most of the opening, kicking desperately at something I couldn't see. The chain he'd mentioned was wrapped around his left ankle. It must have been a trap, triggered when someone tried to exit. The basement door above us crashed open, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed Kevin's legs and pushed with everything I had, shoving him completely through the opening despite his screams about the chain. The metal scraped more skin off my hands, but I didn't care. I scrambled after him into the pouring rain, landing hard in the mud outside. Kevin was pulling at the chain around his ankle, which led to a metal stake driven deep into the ground about 6 feet from the coal chute. The man appeared in the basement, his flashlight finding us through the opening. In that brief illumination, I saw his face clearly. Not Mr. Garrett, but someone younger, maybe 35, with hollow cheeks and eyes that looked almost bored. He didn't rush. He knew we weren't going anywhere. I grabbed a rock and started hammering at the stake while Kevin pulled the chain taut. The metal stake was solid, professional, like something you'd use to secure a large dog. Behind us, we heard the man climbing back up the basement stairs, taking his time, knowing exactly where we were and how long that stake would hold. The rock wasn't working. Kevin found a broken piece of concrete and together we hammered at the stake base, rain streaming down our faces, hands bleeding and numb. The chain had maybe 4 feet of length. Kevin could stand but couldn't run. We heard the front door open, the barricade being moved from inside. My mind went into pure survival mode. I told Kevin to wrap the chain around his hand and get ready. When the man came around the corner of the house, flashlight leading his way, I threw the concrete chunk at his face. It caught him in the shoulder, spinning him slightly. Kevin yanked the chain hard to the side, pulling the stake at an angle, and it finally gave way, pulling free from the rain-softened ground. We ran. God, we ran like we'd never run before. Kevin dragging 4 feet of chain, me supporting him when he stumbled. The woods were pitch black, branches tearing at our faces, rain blinding us, but we kept going. We could hear him behind us for the first 100 yards, then his footsteps faded. Maybe he knew the woods would do his work for him. Maybe he had other plans. We stumbled and crashed through those woods for what felt like hours until we hit the dirt road, then followed it until we saw headlights. A park ranger doing storm patrol. We were hypothermic, covered in blood and mud, Kevin's ankle torn up from the chain. The ranger called state police immediately. The investigation revealed everything. The real Mr. Garrett had died 2 years earlier. The man we'd met at the gas station was his nephew, Brandon Garrett, who'd been using the property for what police called captivity scenarios. They found evidence of at least 6 other couples in the house, personal items hidden in the walls, scratch marks we'd missed, dried blood in places we hadn't looked. Brandon had been picking his victims carefully, out-of-state couples having relationship problems, people who'd told family they were going offline for a while, people who wouldn't be immediately missed. He'd watch them for hours, sometimes days, testing their desperation, their relationships, seeing how they'd react under extreme pressure. The police found journals in his truck describing each couple in detail. We were labeled couple number 7. He'd written that Kevin seemed protective but weak, that I was a fighter but too emotional. He'd planned to keep us there through the weekend, watching through hidden cameras we never found, documenting our breakdown. The chain trap was just one of 12 he'd installed around the property for runners. Brandon Garrett was arrested 3 days later at a motel in Ohio. He didn't resist, didn't run, just smiled at the officers and asked if the couple made it out okay. He's serving life without parole now. Kevin and I didn't make it, not as a couple. We tried therapy, tried to process it together, but every time we looked at each other, we were back in that house. He moved to Colorado last spring, started over. I still can't sleep during thunderstorms. I triple-check every lock, research every hotel, every Airbnb obsessively. The detective told me we were lucky, that Brandon had been escalating, that the next couple might not have made it out at all. I don't feel lucky. I feel like we left something in that house, some part of ourselves that we'll never get back. The property was demolished last year, but sometimes I check the spot on Google Maps and I swear I can still see it there, waiting for the next couple number 8. Uncle Jerome had been dead for 2 weeks before anyone thought to tell me about the lake house. I was at my desk in Chicago, scrolling through wedding venue prices that made my stomach hurt, when the lawyer finally tracked me down through my mother. Jerome wasn't someone I really knew, just a name that came up at Christmas sometimes, usually followed by my mom shaking her head and changing the subject. Turns out he'd left me his place up in northern Michigan, near some remote part of Torch Lake, where the closest grocery store was an hour away. My fiancé Nathan thought we'd hit the jackpot when I told him that night. We were drowning in bills, trying to save for a wedding that kept getting more expensive every time we blinked. All we had to do was drive up there, clean the place out, slap a for sale sign on it, and we'd have enough for the honeymoon and maybe even a down payment on a real apartment. 5 days later, we packed Nathan's truck with cleaning supplies and headed north, completely clueless about what was waiting for us in those woods. The property was impossible to find without the hand-drawn map the lawyer had faxed over. 6 hours of driving through progressively smaller towns until civilization just sort of stopped. The last 20 miles were nothing but forest, the kind that's so thick it blocks out the sky even in the middle of the day. Nathan missed the turnoff twice. It was just a gap between 2 ancient pines with trunks wider than our truck. No mailbox, no marker, nothing. The dirt road that led to the house went on for what felt like forever, branches scraping against the windows like fingernails. When we finally broke through the tree line, the lake house sat there like something from another era. 2 stories of dark logs and glass, a wraparound porch with half the railings rotting away, and beyond it, Torch Lake stretching out like black silk. Not a single light visible across the water. No boats, no docks except for the crumbling one in front of us. The silence was so complete it made my ears ring. Jerome had lived here alone for 20 years after his wife died, and standing there in that oppressive quiet, I wondered what kind of person chooses that level of isolation. We spent the first hour just walking through the house, trying to make sense of what Jerome had left behind. The place was furnished like time had stopped in 1975. Wood paneling everywhere, orange shag carpet, a kitchen with avocado green appliances that probably belonged in a museum. But it was the details that made me uncomfortable. Every single window had 3 locks on it, including the tiny bathroom window on the 2nd floor. The doors were the same way, deadbolts, chain locks, and these weird sliding bolts at the top and bottom that looked like Jerome had installed them himself. Nathan joked that maybe Jerome was paranoid about bears, but the scratches on the outside of the door frames didn't look like they came from animals. They were too deliberate, too uniform, like someone had been trying to pry their way in with a crowbar or screwdriver. The basement door had it worst of all, 5 different locks and a 2x4 wedged under the handle. We decided to leave that for another day. The whole place smelled like mildew and something else. Something sour and organic that seemed to get stronger near the back of the house where Jerome's bedroom was. The first real sign that something was wrong came when we checked the boathouse. It was about 50 feet from the main house, connected by a path of cracked stepping stones overgrown with moss. Nathan noticed the smell first, like spoiled milk mixed with wet dog. Inside, we found the remnants of what looked like someone's meals scattered across the floor. Not old stuff from Jerome, but fresh garbage. Empty cans of beans with the labels peeled off, plastic water bottles crushed and arranged in neat little pyramids, and chicken bones that still had bits of meat on them. The meat was green and crawling with maggots, but it couldn't have been more than a week old. On the walls, someone had carved these symbols that made no sense. Not quite letters, not quite pictures, just these repetitive marks that covered every wooden surface from floor to ceiling. Nathan counted over 300 of them before he gave up. The really disturbing part was the makeshift bed in the corner, a pile of life jackets arranged into a nest, covered with a tarp that was stained with something dark. Whoever had been sleeping there had also collected things from the main house. We found Jerome's missing tools arranged in a perfect circle around the bed. Hammers, screwdrivers, a rusty hatchet, all pointing inward like some kind of shrine. Nathan wanted to call the police right then, but I convinced him to wait until morning. It was already getting dark, and the closest station was at least an hour away. We figured whoever had been squatting there was long gone, probably cleared out when they heard Jerome had died. We went back to the main house, locked every single door and window, suddenly grateful for Jerome's paranoid security system, and tried to settle in for the night. Nathan started a fire in the living room fireplace while I went through Jerome's papers in the study, looking for information about the property sale. That's when I found his journals. Dozens of them, going back 15 years, all filled with the same cramped handwriting. The recent entries were what caught my attention. Jerome wrote about them constantly, never saying who they were, just that they came at night, that they watched from the water, that they wanted inside. The last entry was dated 3 days before he died. They're getting bolder. Found footprints on the porch this morning, 6 toes on the left foot. They're not trying to hide anymore. I showed Nathan and we both tried to laugh it off. Old man living alone in the woods, probably dementia setting in. But neither of us could explain the wet footprints we'd noticed on the porch when we arrived, or why one of them had 6 toe marks. The scratching started around midnight. At first I thought it was just branches against the house. God knows there were enough trees around. But it was too rhythmic, too deliberate. Scratch, 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 pause, scratch, 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 pause, always in sets of 3. Nathan grabbed a flashlight and went to the window, trying to see what was making the noise. The beam barely penetrated 10 feet into the darkness before being swallowed up by the trees. The scratching moved around the house slowly, stopping at each window like something was testing them. We followed the sound from room to room, Nathan clutching a baseball bat he'd found in the closet, me holding my phone with 911 already dialed but not yet called. The sound stopped at the back door, the one leading to Jerome's bedroom. We stood there in the hallway, barely breathing, waiting. Then the doorknob turned. Just once, very slowly, like someone was checking if it was locked. Nathan yelled out that we had a gun, we didn't, and that we'd already called the cops, we hadn't. The silence that followed was worse than any sound. We stood there for maybe 5 minutes, Nathan's knuckles white around the bat, before we heard footsteps on the deck. Not running, not hurried, just calm, measured steps walking away. Except the footsteps had this weird rhythm to them, like whoever was walking had an injured leg or was dragging something. Neither of us slept after that. We sat in the living room with every light in the house on, taking turns watching the windows. Around 3 a.m., Nathan spotted something moving near the dock. 3 figures, just standing at the edge of the water, facing the house. They were too far away to make out any details, but something about their proportions seemed wrong. Their arms hung down past where their knees should be, and their heads looked too small for their bodies. They stood there for almost an hour, perfectly still, before one of them made this sound. Not quite a whistle, not quite a scream, but something in between that made every hair on my body stand up. The others responded with the same call, and then they just walked backward into the lake. Not turned around and walked in, but walked backward without looking, until the water swallowed them up. Nathan wanted to leave right then, just get in the truck and drive. But I reminded him that meant going outside, walking 50 feet to where we'd parked, with those things somewhere out there in the darkness. We decided to wait for sunrise, then get out fast. I started gathering Jerome's important papers while Nathan kept watch, both of us counting down the minutes until dawn. The sun finally came up around 6:30, and everything looked different in the daylight. Normal, almost peaceful. We could see the whole lake, empty except for a few loons floating near the shore. Nathan did a quick walk around the house while I loaded our bags into the truck. He found more footprints, lots of them, all around the house and leading down to the water. But the weird thing was that some of them were normal, 5-toed human prints, while others had that 6th toe, and still others looked like someone had been walking on their hands. There were marks on all the windows where they'd been tested, and the locked basement door had fresh scratches all around the deadbolt. We were throwing the last of our stuff in the truck when Nathan noticed the hood was open about an inch. He popped it fully, and that's when we saw that someone had removed the battery cables and tied them in elaborate knots. Not cut them, not torn them, but carefully knotted them in these complex patterns that must have taken at least an hour to create. The spare tire was gone too, and in its place was a pile of those same carved symbols from the boathouse, made from twisted pieces of metal that looked like they'd been pulled from the dock. Nathan's phone had no signal, and mine was completely dead even though I'd charged it the night before. The landline in the house had been cut. We found the wire pulled out from the external box and braided into more of those intricate patterns. We were trapped, at least until we could fix the truck or walk the 5 miles to the main road. Nathan started working on unknotting the battery cables while I went back inside to look for tools that might help. That's when I noticed Jerome's journals were gone, all of them, even though I'd stacked them on the kitchen table just hours before. In their place was a single piece of paper with a message written in what looked like mud or clay. He invited us. The lake remembers. You can't sell what was promised. The handwriting was bizarre, like someone had tried to write with their non-dominant hand or maybe with their foot. Some letters were backward, others were symbols I didn't recognize. While I was staring at this message, Nathan started yelling from outside. Not scared yelling, but frustrated. Someone had filled the gas tank with lake water while we were inside. We could see it dripping out from under the truck, muddy and full of algae. The police finally arrived around 2 p.m., after Nathan had walked 2 miles down the dirt road and found enough signal to call. 2 officers from the county sheriff's department, both looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. They took one look at the boathouse and called for backup, said it was the 3rd property they'd seen like this in the past month. The older cop, Officer Daniels, pulled me aside while his partner photographed everything. He told me that there had been reports going back decades about a group of people living in the woods around Torch Lake. Not quite a family, not quite a cult, but something in between. They supposedly had birth defects from generations of isolation, extra digits, elongated limbs, problems with their vocal cords that made them sound inhuman. The state had tried to intervene in the 80s, but they could never find them. They lived somewhere out in the wetlands, moving between abandoned properties, surviving on fish and whatever they could steal. Daniels said Jerome had been reporting encounters for years, but nobody took him seriously until recently when other property owners started calling in similar stories. The really messed up part was what he said next. These people seemed to believe that certain properties belonged to them by some ancient right, and they got aggressive when outsiders tried to claim them. Officer Daniels offered to escort us out, said he'd have a tow truck meet us at the main road. While we were packing up the last of our things, his partner found something in the basement that even made these seasoned cops go pale. Remember that door with 5 locks that we never opened? Behind it was Jerome's real bedroom. He'd been sleeping in the basement for who knows how long. The walls were covered in photographs, hundreds of them, all taken from the woods looking into the house. Pictures of Jerome cooking, reading, sleeping. Some were recent, but others went back years based on how young Jerome looked in them. The disturbing part was that in some of the photos, you could see the photographer's reflection in the window, elongated shadows with those distinctive 6-fingered hands pressed against the glass. Jerome had written dates on the back of each photo, documenting when they were taken. The most recent batch was from the week before he died, and in those, you could see multiple figures in the reflections. They'd been getting bolder, just like his journal said. Daniels bagged everything as evidence and told us we were lucky we'd only stayed one night. The previous owner of another property, an elderly woman named Ruth, had lasted 3 nights before they found her wandering the main road, talking about people who walked like spiders and spoke in whistles. We left that afternoon with a police escort, Nathan's truck on the back of a flatbed, our engagement rings feeling stupid on our fingers after what we'd been through. The sheriff's department opened an investigation, but Officer Daniels called me a week later to say they'd found nothing. The boathouse had been completely cleaned out, all the symbols painted over with fresh white paint that was still wet when they arrived. No fingerprints, no DNA, nothing. He advised us to sell the property through a broker and never go back. We took his advice, but the sale fell through 3 times. Each potential buyer reported the same thing: strange sounds from the lake at night, things moving in the woods, and always that feeling of being watched. The property is still in my name technically, but I'll never go back. Nathan and I called off the wedding 6 months later. We never talked about why, but I think we both knew that some experiences either bond you forever or break you apart. And what happened at that lake broke something fundamental between us. Sometimes I get calls from the current caretaker the state assigned to check on the property. He never says much, just that they're still around and that he's found more of those symbols carved into new places. Last month he sent me a photo of the dock where someone had arranged hundreds of 6-toed footprints in the mud, all pointing toward the house. The message is clear. They're waiting. The lake remembers. And someday someone will be foolish enough to try to live there again. The deadline was killing me. 6 months to finish a book about corruption in local politics, and I hadn't written a single decent chapter. That's why I drove up to Maine last September, renting this lake house through a sketchy website that hadn't been updated since 2008. The owner, Mrs. Holloway, met me at a gas station 20 miles away to hand over the keys, said she didn't like going near the property anymore, but wouldn't elaborate. The place was perfect though. A cedar-shingled cabin tucked between pine trees, about 50 yards from the water's edge. No neighbors for at least a mile in either direction. The nearest town, Millfield, was a 40-minute drive through winding forest roads. Just me, my laptop, and enough instant coffee to fuel a small army. The first night around 11 I heard it while reviewing interview transcripts. Music drifting across the water, maybe acoustic guitars, voices harmonizing. The sound was so faint I had to strain to make it out through the double-pane windows. I figured some college kids were camping on the opposite shore, probably sitting around a fire with their guitars. The lake was huge, almost 3 miles across at its widest point, and sound carries strangely over water. I actually found it kind of pleasant, this distant reminder that other people existed. By midnight it had stopped, and I worked until 3 in the morning, making real progress for the first time in weeks. The isolation was exactly what I needed. Wednesday night, the music started earlier, around 9:30. This time it seemed louder, though still muffled and dreamlike. 3 voices, I thought, 2 higher, 1 lower, weaving together in these long, sustained notes that didn't quite match any song I knew. The melody kept shifting, never quite resolving, like they were improvising or working through something unfinished. I walked out onto the deck with a beer, trying to spot a campfire across the water, but the far shore was just a black line against the stars. The temperature had dropped into the 40s, and I couldn't imagine anyone camping in that cold. After about an hour, the singing faded out gradually, like someone slowly turning down a volume knob. I went back inside and tried to focus on my chapter about kickbacks in the highway department, but I kept finding myself listening for the voices to start again. By Friday, I was genuinely puzzled. The music had come every single night, always starting a little earlier, always lasting a bit longer. That evening it began just after sunset, maybe 7 o'clock, and this time it was unmistakably closer. Not from across the lake anymore, but somewhere along my side of the shore. The harmonies were clearer now, and there was something unsettling about how perfectly the 3 voices matched each other, like they'd been singing together for years. No instruments this time, just those voices rising and falling in patterns that seemed almost mathematical in their precision. I grabbed a flashlight and walked down to my dock, scanning the tree line in both directions. Nothing, no boats, no lights, no movement. The singing continued for nearly 2 hours, and I swear at certain moments it sounded like it was coming from multiple directions at once, as if the singers were slowly circling the property. Saturday morning, I drove into Millfield for supplies and stopped at the local library. The librarian, a woman in her 60s with thick glasses and a cardigan despite the warm day, seemed to recognize me immediately. "You're staying at the Holloway place," she said, not a question. When I asked about the property's history, she disappeared into a back room and returned with a manila folder stuffed with newspaper clippings. The cabin had been built in 1967 by a man named Arthur Brennan, who taught music at the regional high school. He'd used it as a weekend retreat where he gave private lessons to advanced students. In April 1994, Brennan had gone missing along with two of his students, a 17-year-old girl named Melissa Crane and an 18-year-old boy named Jason Dufresne. Their cars were found at the cabin, doors open, keys still in the ignitions. No bodies were ever recovered from the lake, despite a 3-week search involving divers and sonar equipment. The librarian leaned in closer, glancing around the empty library as if someone might overhear. "Brennan was obsessed with something called shape note singing," she explained. "It's an old American tradition, sacred music mainly, but he had his own ideas about it. Said he could use harmonics to affect brain waves, consciousness, that kind of thing. The parents of those kids found recordings in his classroom after he disappeared. Hours and hours of the three of them singing these bizarre arrangements he'd written." She photocopied several articles for me, including one with a grainy photo of Brennan, a thin man with hollow cheeks and intense eyes, standing between two teenagers in matching navy sweaters. The girl had long dark hair parted in the middle. The boy was tall and angular with a nervous smile. All three were holding sheet music, and behind them, I could make out the blurred edge of what looked like the same dock I'd stood on the night before. I spent the rest of Saturday researching Brennan online, finding fragments of information scattered across old forums and archived websites. He'd self-published a pamphlet in 1993 called Harmonic Resonance and Human Consciousness, which described his theories about using specific vocal frequencies to induce altered states. A few copies had survived in university libraries, and someone had scanned pages showing complex musical notations with handwritten notes in the margins. Things like neural entrainment at 783 Hz and binaural effect requires precise positioning. That night, the singing started at dusk, and this time I was ready with my phone recording. The voices were so clear now that I could hear individual breathing patterns between phrases, the subtle scratch of throat clearing, even what sounded like footsteps on gravel. But when I played back the recording later, all I got was static and the sound of wind through trees, even though the night had been perfectly still. Sunday, I couldn't concentrate on writing at all. I kept thinking about those three people, wondering what exactly had happened here in 1994. The singing began in late afternoon, while the sun was still bright on the water, and for the first time I could make out actual words, or at least syllables that might have been words in some language I didn't recognize. The voices seemed to be coming from underneath the cabin now, impossible as that was since it sat on a concrete foundation. I got down on my knees and pressed my ear to the floor. The sound vibrated through the wood, making my teeth ache. Around 8 o'clock, something new happened. The three voices split apart, each one moving to a different part of the property. One stayed beneath the cabin, one drifted toward the dock, and one circled through the trees. They continued singing to each other across the distance, their harmonies creating interference patterns that made my vision blur and my balance waver. I stumbled outside, nauseated and disoriented, just as all three voices suddenly stopped mid-note, leaving a silence so complete it felt like pressure against my eardrums. Monday morning I packed my laptop and notes, ready to leave, but something made me check the crawl space under the cabin first. Call it morbid curiosity or journalistic instinct. The access panel was behind a stack of old life jackets in the storage closet. When I pried it open, a smell hit me, musty and organic like wet paper and something else I couldn't identify. I aimed my flashlight into the darkness and saw them immediately. Dozens of cassette tapes scattered across the dirt floor, their labels faded but still partially legible. Dates from 1993 and 1994. Names: Melissa, scale work; Jason, breathing X; 3, all three, convergence pattern. My hands trembled as I grabbed a few and retreated back into the cabin. The old boombox in the kitchen still worked, and when I pressed play on the first tape, those same three voices filled the room. Younger, less refined, but unmistakably the same harmonies I'd been hearing all week. The second tape was different. Brennan's voice speaking alone. Day 43 of vocal conditioning. The students are progressing beyond my expectations. The resonance points we've discovered in this location are remarkable. The lake bed's mineral composition, the specific acoustic properties of the cedar walls, even the elevation creates perfect conditions. We're approaching something unprecedented here. The boundaries are becoming fluid. Then singing again, but this time with Brennan's voice providing instruction between phrases. Feel the vibration in your sternum, Melissa. Jason, lower your larynx slightly. Yes, that's it. Now hold that frequency while I... The tape cut to static, then picked up mid-session with all three voices locked in a pattern that made my skull feel like it was being squeezed in a vice. I turned it off, but the echo continued in my ears, in my bones, in the wooden beams of the cabin itself. When I looked outside, the late morning sun on the lake seemed wrong somehow, the light bending at angles that water shouldn't create. The final tape I grabbed was labeled simply, "Success, do not distribute." Brennan's voice was excited, almost manic. We've done it. The harmonic convergence point lasted 90 seconds this time. The students experienced simultaneous consciousness. They could perceive through each other's senses, share thoughts without speaking. The frequency pattern is imprinted now, embedded in the wood, the foundation, the very air around this place. Even when we're not here, the resonance continues. It calls to us. We're returning tonight for the final phase. The recording ended with all three voices beginning that same elaborate pattern I'd been hearing all week. But this time there was something else in the background. A fourth voice, or maybe an echo, or maybe the sound of the cabin itself learning the song. I grabbed the tapes and ran to my car, not bothering to pack anything else. As I drove away, I could see Mrs. Holloway's other rental properties along the lake road, all of them dark and apparently vacant despite this being peak season. That was 3 weeks ago. I'm writing this from my apartment in Boston, trying to make sense of what happened. The tapes are sitting in a box in my closet. I can't bring myself to throw them away or listen to them again. Here's the thing that really gets me. I called the library in Millfield yesterday, and the librarian told me something she hadn't mentioned during my visit. After Brennan and his students disappeared, there were 4 other groups of 3 people who went missing from that property over the years. Always musicians or singers who'd rented the place, always vanishing without a trace. The locals stopped talking about it because it hurt property values. Mrs. Holloway keeps renting it out through that old website, always to people from out of state who don't know the history. Sometimes I wake up at night and hear those 3 voices in the distance, even though I'm 300 miles away now. They're getting clearer, more insistent, like they're calling me back. The worst part is that I find myself humming along, knowing exactly which note comes next, as if the pattern has been carved into some deep part of my brain that I can't consciously control. Last August, I packed up my 2 kids and drove 6 hours to a lake house in Oregon, desperate for some peace after the divorce finalized. The place belonged to my college roommate's family, tucked away on the edge of Crater Lake's lesser-known cousin, one of those spots where cell service dies about 20 minutes before you arrive. My daughter Chloe was 12, constantly buried in her fantasy novels, and my son Ethan had just turned 8, still young enough to think a weekend without Wi-Fi was an adventure rather than a punishment. The lake house sat on stilts, weather-beaten cedar shingles and windows facing the water, surrounded by Douglas firs so thick you could barely see the gravel road we'd driven in on. We'd arrived Friday afternoon under clear skies, spent Saturday hiking and roasting marshmallows, completely unaware that the weather forecast had shifted dramatically overnight. Sunday morning brought clouds so dark they turned the lake the color of old motor oil, and by noon the rain was coming down in sheets that bent the tree branches nearly horizontal. The kids and I were playing Monopoly on the living room floor, the old wood-burning stove crackling beside us, when someone knocked on the door, 3 heavy thuds that echoed through the house. I remember glancing at my watch, 2:47 p.m. Through the front window I could make out a figure hunched against the rain, water streaming off what looked like a yellow raincoat. When I opened the door, keeping the chain latched, I found myself looking at a man maybe 45 years old, his gray hair plastered to his skull, water pooling around his hiking boots. He had these pale blue eyes, almost silver in the storm light, and a scar that ran from his left ear down to his jaw, white against his weathered skin. His raincoat was torn at the shoulder and his hands were trembling. Whether from cold or something else I couldn't tell. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry to bother you," he said, his voice hoarse like he'd been yelling over the wind. "My boat flipped about a quarter-mile out, got caught in the storm trying to get back to the marina. I barely made it to shore." He gestured vaguely behind him toward the lake, though through the rain I couldn't see past the tree line. "I saw your lights from the water. I know this is strange, but could I come in just long enough to warm up? Maybe use your phone to call for a ride?" Something about the way he kept wiping his hands on his soaked jeans, over and over, made me hesitate. But then Ethan appeared beside me, curious as always, and the man's face shifted into this warm, grandfatherly smile that made me feel guilty for my suspicion. Against every horror movie rule I'd ever screamed at characters for breaking, I unlatched the chain. "Just for a few minutes," I said, stepping aside. "You can sit by the fire." He stepped inside with this odd carefulness, like he was memorizing the layout, eyes scanning the living room, the hallway leading to the bedrooms, the kitchen entrance. Water dripped steadily from his clothes onto the hardwood, forming a puddle that reflected the firelight. "Beautiful place," he said, moving straight to the wood stove without invitation, holding his hands out to the heat. "You folks live here year-round?" I explained we were just visiting for the weekend, immediately regretting how much information I was volunteering. Chloe had retreated to the couch with her book, but she kept glancing up at him with that teenage wariness she'd developed lately. The man introduced himself as Douglas, no last name, just Douglas, and began describing his supposed accident in detail, how the storm came out of nowhere, how his 16-foot aluminum boat got swamped by a rogue wave, how he'd clung to a cooler until he could swim to shore. The whole time he talked, his eyes kept drifting to the hallway, and twice he asked seemingly innocent questions that made my chest tighten. "These old places must have been built before modern locks, huh? And, your husband out getting supplies before the roads flood?" I told him my phone was in the kitchen and excused myself, leaving him by the fire with my kids just 15 feet away, a decision that still makes me nauseous when I think about it. In the kitchen, I grabbed my cell but found exactly what I expected. No signal. The landline on the wall was old but functional, and I picked it up, ready to call 911, or at least the marina to verify his story. But as I started dialing, I could hear Douglas talking to Ethan in the living room, asking him about his favorite hiding spots in the house, whether he'd explored all the rooms yet. My finger hovered over the numbers as I heard him say, "Bet you and your sister have your own rooms here." Lucky kids. Which one has the better view? The casualness of it, the way he was fishing for information while I was out of sight, made my mouth go dry. I hung up quietly and moved to the kitchen window that faced the shoreline, straining to see through the rain for any sign of a capsized boat, debris, anything that would confirm his story. The lake was choppy, whitecaps visible even through the downpour, but there was nothing else. No overturned hull, no floating cooler, no indication anyone had been out on that water. When I returned to the living room, Douglas had moved from the stove and was standing by our front door, examining the deadbolt with his fingers. "Old Schläge," he said without looking at me. "These can be tricky in weather like this. The wood swells, makes them stick." "You folks having any trouble with it?" Ethan was showing him his collection of rocks he'd found on our hike yesterday, completely oblivious to the way Douglas kept touching things, The door frame, the window locks, the light switches, like he was taking inventory. "Did you reach anyone?" he asked. And when I lied and said the phones were down, his mouth twitched into something that wasn't quite relief, but close enough to make me step between him and my children. "That's unfortunate," he said, moving back toward the fire. "Guess I'll have to wait out the storm here. These things can last hours, sometimes all night." The assumption that he was staying, the way he just invited himself to remain in our space, sent a cold prickle down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. The next hour crawled by with excruciating slowness, while Douglas made himself increasingly comfortable in our space. He'd found a towel in the bathroom without asking, dried his hair with it, and draped his raincoat over a chair he'd pulled unnecessarily close to where Chloe was reading. Every few minutes he'd make these observations that sounded innocent, but felt like reconnaissance. "No neighbors for what, half a mile? Must be peaceful." Or, "That back door leads straight to the dock, right? Easy access." When Ethan mentioned we'd gone swimming yesterday morning, Douglas perked up and asked if we'd seen any other boats, any fishermen, anyone at all who might have noticed us there. The question hung in the air like smoke, and I found myself lying again, saying yes. We'd waved to several boats, lots of people knew we were here. His expression didn't change, but he started drumming his fingers on his knee in this rapid, agitated rhythm that he hadn't been doing before. Around 4 p.m., he stood abruptly and announced he needed to use the bathroom. But instead of going to the one in the hallway, he walked straight toward the back of the house where the bedrooms were. "First door on the left," I called out, my voice sharp enough that Chloe looked up from her book. But I could hear him walking past the bathroom, his footsteps creaking on the old floorboards as he continued down the hall. I followed quickly, finding him in the doorway of the kids' room, studying the window that faced the woods. "Just checking if I could see the marina from here," he said when he noticed me behind him. "Sometimes you can spot the lights when the rain lets up." But there was no marina in that direction. I knew because we'd driven around the entire lake yesterday. The marina was east. This window faced west into dense forest. "Bathroom's back here," I said firmly, and something in my tone must have finally registered because he nodded and retreated. But as he passed me in the narrow hallway, he paused just long enough to say, "Your girl's about my daughter's age. 12, 13. They grow up so fast, I'd never told him Chloe's age." The bathroom door closed with a soft click, but I stood frozen in the hallway, listening to the rain hammering the roof and trying to convince myself I was overreacting, that maybe Ethan had mentioned his sister's age, that maybe I was just being paranoid. When Douglas emerged from the bathroom, he'd washed his face and hands, but there were muddy boot prints leading all the way to the bathroom that hadn't been there before, like he'd walked outside and come back in while we weren't watching. Except he'd been inside the whole time, hadn't he? I grabbed cleaning supplies from under the kitchen sink, using it as an excuse to follow his trail, and that's when I noticed the back door's deadbolt was unlocked. I distinctly remembered checking all the locks when the storm started. My heart was pounding so hard, I could hear it over the rain as I casually relocked it, then suggested to the kids that we should play a board game in their room. Anything to get them away from Douglas. But he intercepted Ethan in the hallway, crouching down to the boy's level with that same grandfatherly smile. "Hey, buddy, before you go, did you happen to see where your mom keeps the flashlights? Power goes out a lot in storms like this." Ethan, eager to be helpful, started to explain that there was one in the kitchen drawer, one in Mom's room, and a big lantern in the closet by the back door. Douglas nodded along, memorizing every detail, and that's when I saw it. A small handheld marine radio clipped inside his raincoat pocket, the LED power indicator glowing green. If his boat had capsized, if he'd barely survived swimming to shore, why was his radio completely dry and functional? The moment crystallized everything. I scooped up Ethan mid-sentence, told Chloe we were playing hide-and-seek right now, and herded them into my bedroom. Douglas stood slowly, that grandfather mask slipping just enough for me to see something calculating underneath. "Everything okay?" he asked, taking a step toward us. I managed to smile, said the kids had been begging to play all weekend, and closed the bedroom door. My hands fumbled with the old push-button lock, the flimsy kind that could be opened with a bobby pin, but it was better than nothing. I whispered to the kids to stay quiet, that we were going to play a different game. Whoever could stay silent the longest would win. Chloe's face had gone pale. She was old enough to understand something was wrong. From the other side of the door, I could hear Douglas's footsteps, slow and deliberate, stopping right outside. The doorknob turned gently. Testing. "Hey," he called through the door, his voice different now, lower, without the false warmth. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. Why don't you come out and we can talk about this?" The handle jiggled harder, then nothing. Silence except for the rain. I pressed my ear to the door and heard him moving away, but not toward the living room, toward the back door. The one I'd just relocked. The one Ethan had just told him led straight to the dock. I grabbed my cell phone and dialed 911, not caring that there was no signal. Maybe somehow emergency calls would go through. Nothing. The landline was in the kitchen, impossible to reach without leaving the bedroom. We were trapped. Then I remembered the car keys in my pocket. I whispered to the kids that we were going to run to the car on the count of 3, no matter what. Chloe grabbed Ethan's hand and I slowly turned the lock, easing the door open. The hallway was empty, but I could hear sounds from the back of the house, the scraping of metal on metal, like someone working at a lock. We crept toward the front door, and I could see Douglas through the back window, crouched at the door with something in his hand, completely focused on whatever he was doing. We made it to the front door, and I fumbled with the deadbolt that now seemed impossibly loud. It clicked open, and we burst out into the storm. The rain hit us like a wall, instantly soaking through our clothes, but we ran for the car parked 30 feet away. I jammed the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I threw it in reverse just as Douglas came around the side of the house, no longer pretending to be injured or weak. He moved with purpose, almost reaching us before I gunned it backward down the gravel drive, the car sliding in the mud, but finding traction. We drove through the storm for 20 minutes before finding cell service, and I immediately called 911. The police met us at a gas station in town. 2 officers who took our report with increasing concern when I described the man. They sent units to the lake house immediately. What they found still makes me sick to think about. There was no capsized boat, no accident, no maritime emergency. But there were fresh footprints around the entire perimeter of the house from earlier that day, before the knock on the door. Tool marks on the bathroom window frame. And in the woods behind the house, a truck with California plates hidden under a tarp, registered to a man named Douglas Brenner, who'd been released from prison 6 months earlier after serving 8 years for home invasion and assault. The marine radio I'd seen? The police said he probably used it to monitor when families arrived at vacation rentals, listening for their check-in calls to property managers. We weren't random. We were chosen. Watched. He'd been waiting for the storm, for the isolation, for the perfect opportunity. The officers found rope in his truck, zip ties, and a notebook with addresses of lakefront rentals all around Oregon. Ours was circled with a note. Single mother, 2 kids, no dogs. To this day, I don't know how long he'd been watching us before he knocked on that door. It was spring break 2017, and the 6 of us had pooled together what little money we had left after textbooks and ramen to rent this dirt-cheap lake house in upstate New York. I was finishing my junior year at SUNY Albany, drowning in student loans and desperately needing a break from my part-time job at the campus bookstore. My roommate Trevor had found the listing on Airbnb. $40 a night split 6 ways for a whole lake house seemed too good to pass up. The place was about 3 hours north of campus, nestled between thick pine forests and this murky lake that locals called Heron's Rest. Trevor, his girlfriend Madison, my buddy Carlos from Cal-C class, and these 2 girls from our dorm floor, Jenna and Britt, all crammed into Carlos's beat-up Suburban on a Friday afternoon, ready to forget about finals for a week. The lake house looked nothing like the photos when we pulled up around sunset. The wooden siding was this sickly green color, like pond scum had been painted over and left to peel for decades. The deck wrapped around 3 sides, but half the railings were missing, and the dock stretching into the water had gaps between the planks wide enough to lose your phone through. But we were 21 and stupid, more concerned with the cases of beer in the trunk than the state of our accommodations. The key was hidden under a fake rock by the front door, one of those obvious plastic ones you'd buy at Home Depot. The inside smelled like mothballs and something else, something earthy and damp that made me think of my grandmother's root cellar. Madison immediately started opening windows while Trevor hauled in the coolers, and within an hour we had music blasting and red Solo cups scattered across every surface. Around 10 that night, we were all pretty buzzed and playing some drinking game Carlos had made up, involving cards and embarrassing questions, when Jenna's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her face scrunched up in this confused way. "That's weird," she said, holding up her screen. "Someone just texted me, nice pink tank top, but you should probably close the kitchen window behind you." We all laughed because Jenna was wearing a pink tank top and had just come back from the kitchen. But then she got this look on her face. "Guys, I don't have any service up here. How did this come through?" The number had a 5118 area code, local to this region. Trevor grabbed her phone and tried calling it back, but it just rang and rang. We figured it was probably the owner checking in. Maybe they had cameras or something, though nobody remembered seeing any. 20 minutes later, Carlos was out on the deck taking a leak off the side. Classy, I know. When his phone lit up. The text read, "Third plank from the left is loose. Careful you don't fall through." He came bursting back inside, face pale under his stubble, holding his phone like it was contaminated. "Which one of you is messing with me?" But we were all there in the living room, phones visible on the coffee table or in pockets. That's when things started to feel wrong, like the air in the room had gotten heavier. Madison suggested maybe it was locals playing pranks on tourists, which made sense until she pointed out something that made my chest tighten. How would they know our numbers? We literally just got here. The music was still playing, but nobody was dancing anymore. Britt turned it down and we all just sat there looking at each other, waiting for someone to have a logical explanation. Then my phone vibrated. The message made my mouth go dry. "Check the basement door behind the water heater. The lock's been broken for years. Anyone could walk right in." I hadn't even noticed there was a basement. Trevor and Carlos went to investigate while the girls huddled together on the couch. They found the door exactly where the text described, tucked behind this ancient rust-stained water heater in a utility closet we hadn't even opened yet. The padlock hung there, sheared clean through like someone had used bolt cutters. The wooden door opened to narrow stairs disappearing into pure black. Carlos shined his phone flashlight down there, and we could see footprints in the dust, fresh ones, going both down and back up. "We're leaving," Madison announced, already grabbing her purse. But Trevor, trying to be the tough guy, insisted we search the house first. "If someone's hiding here, we need to know," he said, though his voice cracked a little. We split into pairs and searched every room, every closet, under every bed. The house had this weird layout with rooms that connected in unexpected ways. A bathroom with 2 doors, a closet that opened into another bedroom, a hallway that dead-ended at a wall with a small hatch near the floor. Jenna and I were checking the master bedroom when we found something that made us both stop breathing for a second. On the dusty dresser, someone had drawn a smiley face, and underneath it, 6 tally marks. 6 of us. The dust around it was undisturbed except for those finger marks, fresh and deliberate. That's when Britt screamed from downstairs. We rushed down to find her staring at her phone, trembling. The new message read, "You missed the attic access in the hall closet. I'm disappointed. I thought college kids were supposed to be smart." Trevor yanked open the hall closet so hard the door bounced off the wall. Behind a row of moldy life jackets, there it was, a square cutout in the ceiling with a rope hanging down. The rope looked new, bright white against the yellowed walls like someone had recently replaced it. We could hear something up there, a subtle creaking that wasn't quite in rhythm with the wind outside. "Call 911, Madison said, but our phones had no signal for calls, only these texts kept coming through somehow. Carlos tried using the landline in the kitchen, but the line was dead, just this soft clicking sound when you picked up the receiver. We were 40 minutes from the nearest town, surrounded by dark forest and that black lake. Trevor and Carlos pulled down the attic access and a ladder unfolded. The smell that wafted down was overwhelming. Body odor, rotting food, and something chemical like old batteries. Trevor climbed up first with his phone light, then immediately came back down, his face completely drained of color. "Someone's been living up there," he whispered. "There's a sleeping bag, empty food cans, bottles filled with liquid, and photos. Dozens of photos taped to the beams." Before anyone could respond, all 6 of our phones buzzed simultaneously. The message was longer this time. The previous renters were fun too. The family in January only lasted 3 hours before they ran. The couple in December made it through the night but left their dog behind. "Don't worry, I fed him. You're doing better than most. The secret is knowing all the ways in and out, like the crawl space that connects the basement to the dock storage, or the panel in the back of the bedroom closet that opens to the attic. Or my favorite, the old dumbwaiter behind the kitchen wall that still works if you know which board to push." Madison started crying, and honestly, I was close to joining her. This person had been here the whole time, had been watching other renters, had made this place his sick little game. Jenna was already at the door with her keys, but when she turned the deadbolt, it wouldn't budge. The lock was jammed, stuffed with something from the outside. Carlos grabbed a kitchen chair and smashed it through the living room window. The glass exploded outward and cold air rushed in, but as he was clearing the remaining shards, another text arrived. "Breaking things costs extra. The owner will add it to your bill. $200 for the window, $50 for the chair. I keep track of everything." That detail, keeping track of damages, made it suddenly real in this mundane, horrible way. This wasn't just some creep. This person had access to the rental account, knew the owner, maybe was the owner. Trevor was already helping Madison through the broken window when we heard footsteps above us, slow and deliberate, walking from one end of the attic to the other. Then a dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. The attic access ladder started to retract on its own, folding up into the ceiling. Someone was pulling it up from inside. "Go, go, go," Trevor shouted, practically throwing Britt through the window opening. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears as I helped Jenna through, her hands slick with sweat and shaking. We ran to Carlos's Suburban, feet crunching on the gravel driveway, nobody looking back at the house. The keys were shaking in Carlos's hand as he tried to start the engine. It turned over once, twice, then nothing. The battery was dead. That's when we noticed the hood was slightly popped, like someone had been under there. My phone lit up again. I disconnected a few things. Walking to town might be good exercise, though the woods get pretty confusing at night. People have gotten lost for days. Trevor was already on the ground, sliding under the vehicle with his phone light, trying to see what had been tampered with. Madison was on the verge of hyperventilating, and Britt was trying to flag down any cars on the remote road, but nothing had passed since we'd arrived. That's when I noticed movement in the house, a silhouette in the broken living room window, just standing there watching us scramble around the dead vehicle. The figure raised something to their ear, a phone, and all 6 of our phones buzzed one final time. The owner keeps a spare key in a magnetic box under the generator shed. The generator has enough fuel to run for 3 days. The shed locks from the inside. Choose wisely. It was a trap or it was help, but either way we needed shelter and a way to call for help. The generator would mean power, maybe internet, maybe a way out of this nightmare. Carlos spotted the shed about 50 yards away, barely visible in the darkness. We moved as a group, nobody wanting to separate, our phone lights creating shifting shadows between the trees. The magnetic box was exactly where the text said, containing a single brass key. Inside the shed was an old diesel generator, some gas cans, tools, and miracle of miracles. an old corded phone mounted on the wall. Trevor grabbed it and got a dial tone. His fingers were shaking as he punched in 911. We could hear the operator answer, Trevor frantically explaining our location, the break-in, the stalking, everything pouring out in a jumbled rush. The police arrived 45 minutes later, the longest 45 minutes of my life. We stayed locked in that shed, taking turns watching through the small window as flashlight beams searched the house. They found the attic setup, the basement entrance, all the hidden passages the texts had described, but they never found him. The officer told us the house had been a problem property for years. Complaints from renters about feeling watched, items moved, strange sounds. The owner, some investment company in Florida, just kept lowering the price and paying off anyone who complained too loudly. They towed Carlos's Suburban to town, where a mechanic fixed what turned out to be just disconnected battery cables and a removed fuse. We drove straight through the night back to Albany. Nobody sleeping, nobody talking about what happened. The next week I saw the lake house was still listed on Airbnb. The price dropped to $30 a night. The review section had been wiped clean. Sometimes I still get random texts from 518 numbers, just single words like remember or visit again. I never respond. I changed my number eventually, moved to Arizona after graduation, got a normal job, a normal life. But every time I pass a lake or see an Airbnb listing for some too cheap remote property, my chest gets tight and I remember that silhouette in the window, just standing there, like he owned the place. Maybe he did. July in Vermont hits different than anywhere else I've been, and we'd been planning this lake house getaway since March, when my wife Angela found the listing online. I'm an accountant at a firm downtown. She teaches 4th grade, and between our jobs and raising 2 kids, we desperately needed these 2 weeks away from everything. Our son Tommy had just turned 8 that spring, and our daughter Lily was 13 going on 30. Complete with the eye rolls and the constant texting with her friends. We arrived at the rental around 4 on a Friday afternoon. This beautiful cedar-sided place nestled right on Lake Champlain's eastern shore, surrounded by these towering pines that made the air smell incredible. The property had everything the photos promised: a wraparound deck with weathered Adirondack chairs, a private dock stretching into the water, and this view of the lake that looked like something from a postcard. Angela dove straight into organizing the kitchen while I unloaded our SUV, and the kids immediately ran down to explore the dock, their laughter bouncing across the calm water. The whole setup was perfect, exactly what we needed, though the nearest neighbors were barely visible through the trees on either side, and across the lake there was nothing but forest and what looked like a few old structures hidden in the shadows of the opposite shore. After dinner that first night, burgers on this ancient Weber grill that probably came with the house, we were all out on the deck just soaking in the quiet when Tommy grabbed my arm around 9:30. "Dad, someone's playing with flashlights over there," he said, pointing across the dark water to the opposite shore, maybe half a mile away. I saw them immediately, these bright white lights blinking in what seemed like a pattern from somewhere in the tree line on the far side of the lake. My first thought was teenagers messing around, or maybe boaters signaling each other, because Lake Champlain gets pretty busy with recreational traffic during summer months. But Angela was the one who noticed how methodical it was. 3 quick flashes, then this slow, sweeping beam that moved from left to right, followed by 3 more quick flashes, and the whole sequence would repeat. "Probably just kids being kids," I said, though something about the precision of it made me keep watching. The beam, whenever it did that slow sweep across the water, would always end up aimed directly at our deck, lingering there for several seconds like someone was studying us through the darkness before the light would click off completely. We watched for maybe 15 minutes and it never varied. Same exact pattern every time, always ending with that beam trained on our rental house like a finger pointing through the night. The next morning, Saturday, I woke up around 6:30 to find Tommy already on the deck with a bowl of cereal, using the binoculars we'd brought for bird watching to scan the opposite shore. Trying to see where those lights came from, he told me. And honestly, in the bright morning sun with mist rising off the lake, the whole thing seemed silly, like we'd gotten spooked over nothing. Through the binoculars, I could make out what looked like an old cabin or boathouse partially hidden in the trees across the water, its brown walls almost invisible against the forest, with a small rotting dock that had mostly collapsed into the lake. The place looked abandoned for years. Part of the roof had caved in, and even from this distance you could see vines growing up the sides. I told Tommy it was probably just local kids who knew about the old building and used it as a hangout spot, which made perfect sense in daylight. We spent the rest of Saturday doing normal vacation stuff, swimming, kayaking. Angela read her book on the deck while Lily complained about the weak Wi-Fi signal. By evening, I'd pretty much forgotten about the lights until we were roasting marshmallows around 9 o'clock, and Tommy suddenly dropped his s'more in the fire. "They're back," he whispered, and sure enough, across the black water, the same exact pattern had started up again. This time, I paid closer attention to the timing. Each complete cycle took exactly 45 seconds. I counted it on my watch, and the beam that swept across always moved at the same speed. Mechanical almost, like someone was following a script. Angela wanted to take the kids inside, but I was getting annoyed now because whoever was doing this was clearly trying to freak out the renters, probably some local tradition to mess with tourists. "I'm going to check it out," I told Angela, grabbing a flashlight and heading down to our dock where we had a small aluminum rowboat tied up that came with the rental. She tried to talk me out of it, said we should just call the rental company in the morning, but something about the deliberateness of those lights made me want answers right then. The lake was dead calm, like black glass, and the sound of the oars cutting through the water seemed incredibly loud in the quiet night. As I rowed across, I kept my flashlight off, not wanting to announce my approach, just following the rhythm of those signals that kept repeating their pattern. The closer I got, the more I could see that the lights were coming from that derelict cabin I'd spotted earlier, specifically from what must have been a window on the upper floor. About 100 feet from the opposite shore, the lights suddenly stopped completely, like whoever was operating them had noticed me coming. I beached the rowboat on what was left of the old dock, the wood creaking and bending under my weight in a way that made me test each step before committing to it. Up close, the cabin was in worse shape than it looked from across the lake, windows broken, door hanging off its hinges, and this smell of rot and mildew that hit you like a wall. But what caught my attention immediately were fresh footprints in the mud leading from the water's edge to the cabin's side entrance, and I mean fresh, like someone had walked through here within the last few hours. The door was barely attached, and when I pushed it open with my flashlight, it scraped against the floor with this grinding sound that made me wince. Inside, most of the downstairs was what you'd expect. Moldy furniture, collapsed ceiling sections, raccoon droppings everywhere. But then I noticed something that made me stop cold. In the corner, partially hidden under a tarp, was a modern camping setup. A sleeping bag, some canned food, bottles of water, and a portable camp stove that looked recently used. Someone was definitely living here, or at least staying here regularly, and that changed everything about those lights. The narrow stairs to the upper floor were sketchy at best, missing several steps, but I could see light footprints in the dust leading up, so someone had been using them. When I finally made it to the top, using the walls to support myself where the steps were gone, I found myself in what must have been a bedroom once, now mostly empty, except for what I saw by the window. There was a folding table set up with a pair of high-end binoculars, the expensive kind hunters use, pointed directly across the lake at our rental house. Next to them sat a powerful LED flashlight, the kind that can throw a beam for miles, and a notebook that made my chest tighten when I opened it. Page after page of detailed notes about families staying at our rental, dates, number of people, daily routines, when they went to bed, when they woke up, what they did during the day. June 10th to 17. Family of 5, 3 teenagers, father goes for morning jogs at 6 a.m., mother reads on deck afternoons, kids swim until dark. The entries went back months, maybe longer, each one meticulously documenting the habits of whoever rented the lake house. Our family was already there too, started just yesterday. July 21st. Family of 4 arrived 4 p.m., accountant father, license plate RFK 8827. Teacher mother, boy approx 8, girl approx 13, son interested in fishing, daughter stays inside mostly. Whoever wrote this had been watching us from the moment we'd pulled into the driveway. I started photographing the pages with my phone, my fingers trembling as I flipped through more entries. And that's when I found the section that made me want to grab my family and leave immediately. Behind the regular observation notes was a collection of photographs, dozens of them, all taken with a telephoto lens from this very window. Families on the deck, kids playing in the water, people through the windows at night when the house lights made them visible from across the lake. There were photos of a woman in a bathrobe through a bedroom window, a father carrying his sleeping child from the car, teenagers sneaking beers on the dock after their parents went to bed. Some photos had red circles drawn around specific people, mostly children with notes scribbled on the backs. Would trust strangers. Parents inattentive after 10 p.m. Back door left unlocked during day. One photo showed a young boy, maybe 6 years old, circled in red with the note, "Similar to Gregory, same hair, same build, watches cartoons alone in living room 7 to 8 a.m. I didn't know who Gregory was, but the implication made me sick to my stomach. At the bottom of the pile, I found recent pictures from yesterday. Our arrival, Tommy running to the dock, Lily on her phone on the deck, Angela unpacking groceries through the kitchen window. The sound of a boat motor in the distance snapped me back to reality, and when I looked out the window, I could see navigation lights approaching from the north end of the lake, heading in the general direction of this cabin. I grabbed the notebook and as many photos as I could stuff in my pockets before heading back down those broken stairs, nearly falling twice in my rush. As I reached the bottom floor, I heard the boat engine getting louder, definitely closer now, and through a crack in the wall I could see it was slowing down, angling toward this shore. I ran to my rowboat, pushed off hard, and started rowing back across the lake faster than I'd ever rowed in my life, the aluminum hull slapping against the water with each frantic stroke. Behind me I heard the other boat's engine cut out, followed by the sound of footsteps on that rotten dock, but I didn't look back, just kept pulling those oars until my shoulders burned. When I finally reached our side of the lake, Angela was waiting on our dock with a police flashlight we kept in the kitchen, and I could see she'd already gotten the kids inside. "Pack everything," I told her, breathing hard. "We're leaving tonight." She started to ask questions, but something in my face must have told her this wasn't the time, because she just nodded and ran back to the house. While Angela threw our stuff into bags, I called 911 from the kitchen, trying to explain to the dispatcher that someone had been stalking rental families at this address for months, possibly years. The woman on the phone said she'd send a unit to check it out, but from her tone, I could tell she thought I was overreacting about some local kids pranking tourists. I pulled out my phone to show Angela the photos I'd taken of the notebook pages, and that's when we heard Tommy's voice from upstairs. "Mom, Dad, there's someone in our yard." We both ran to his bedroom window, and there in the moonlight, standing at the tree line about 30 feet from the house, was a figure just watching our house. They weren't trying to hide, weren't moving, just standing there perfectly still like they wanted us to know they were there. I grabbed the police flashlight and shined it directly at them. It was a man, probably mid-40s, wearing regular clothes like jeans and a fleece jacket, with this completely blank expression on his face. The moment the light hit him, he raised his hand in a slow wave, the kind you'd give to a neighbor, then turned and walked calmly back into the woods. Angela already had both kids in the hallway with our bags, and we practically ran to the car, not even bothering to lock the rental house door behind us. We drove 20 minutes before I felt safe enough to pull over and really explain to Angela what I'd found in that cabin, showing her the photos on my phone and the physical pictures I'd grabbed. She called the rental company's emergency line while I talked to the police again, this time getting transferred to a detective who seemed to take things more seriously when I mentioned the detailed surveillance notes and photographs of children. We spent the rest of the night in a Holiday Inn near Burlington, the kids confused but picking up on our fear enough not to ask too many questions. The detective called back around 3 a.m. They'd searched the cabin and found the setup exactly as I'd described it, plus more notebooks in a hidden compartment under the floorboards going back 3 years, thousands of photos, and what looked like plans for something they wouldn't elaborate on over the phone. The man who'd been living there was Walter Briggs, a registered sex offender who'd been off the radar for 2 years after cutting his ankle monitor and disappearing from a halfway house in New Hampshire. They caught him that same night trying to break into another lakefront rental 6 miles north, where a family with 3 young kids was staying. The rental company refunded everything and apparently launched a whole investigation into their property management after the detective told them Briggs had been using that abandoned cabin as his observation post for over 2 years, without anyone noticing. We had to go back the next week to give formal statements, and the detective showed us more of what they'd found. Briggs had detailed maps of every rental property on that section of the lake, had somehow gotten access to booking calendars from multiple rental websites, and knew exactly when families with children would be arriving. The Gregory mentioned in those notes was his nephew who drowned in that same lake 15 years earlier, and the psychiatrist who evaluated him said Briggs had been looking for what he called replacement children ever since his sister cut off contact after the drowning, which she blamed him for. The most disturbing part was finding out that 3 families who'd rented that same house in the past 2 years had reported strange incidents: missing items, toys moved around the yard at night, windows they swore they'd locked found open in the morning. One family even filed a report about their 8-year-old daughter talking about a nice man who'd given her candy by the dock while her parents were inside making lunch, but they never found anyone, and the girl couldn't explain where the man had gone. We never went back to Lake Champlain, and honestly, I can't even look at vacation rental sites without feeling sick. Tommy still has nightmares sometimes about the lights across the water, and Lily won't stay anywhere that doesn't have neighbors close by. The detective called me 6 months later to let me know Briggs had been sentenced to 25 years. They'd found enough evidence in that cabin to charge him with multiple counts of stalking, criminal surveillance, and attempted kidnapping based on those detailed plans they'd discovered. He told me we were lucky, that our decision to leave immediately probably prevented something terrible, though he wouldn't go into specifics about what they thought Briggs had been planning for our family. What haunts me most is thinking about all those families over the years who stayed in that rental house, completely unaware that someone was watching them through high-powered binoculars, documenting their every move, waiting for the perfect opportunity that, thankfully, never came. The rental house was pulled from all the vacation sites after that summer, and last I heard the owners were trying to sell it, though I can't imagine anyone local would buy it knowing its history. Sometimes I still dream about that mechanical pattern of lights across dark water, and I wake up wondering how many other Walter Briggs are out there, sitting in abandoned buildings with notebooks and cameras, watching families who think they're just enjoying a peaceful vacation. I had been living in Milwaukee with my girlfriend Claire when we stumbled on the listing for that foreclosed lake house. It was tucked away in Wisconsin, far from the noise of the city, and the photos made it look like the perfect fixer-upper. We didn't have much money, but the price was too good to ignore. Our idea was simple: put in the work, renovate it ourselves, and turn it into a summer rental that could eventually cover the mortgage. At the time, life felt like it was finally moving in the right direction. Claire was working part-time as a graphic designer, and I was juggling shifts at a hardware store, so the thought of owning property, by a lake no less, felt unreal. The first weekend after we closed, we packed the car with cleaning supplies, sleeping bags, and enough food to last a couple of days. The drive was longer than we expected, the kind that makes you question whether you took the wrong exit somewhere. By the time we reached the house, the sun was dipping low, painting the water in shades of gray and silver. From the outside, the place looked neglected but not hopeless. Faded shutters, chipped paint, overgrown weeds. But beneath all that, you could see the bones of a once-loved family retreat. Claire said it reminded her of the kind of houses her grandparents would rent for fishing trips, and I agreed. It had charm, even if buried under years of neglect. We spent most of that first day dusting, sweeping, and throwing out junk left behind by the previous owners. Old beer cans under the porch, cracked dishes stacked in the cupboards, water-damaged magazines scattered across the living room. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. Every now and then, we'd pause, imagining how we'd repaint the walls or where we'd set up the fire pit outside. The strangest part, though, was how quiet it was. Even with the lake stretching out behind the house, the air felt heavy, like sound didn't travel far out there. I remember standing in the kitchen with the window open and realizing I couldn't hear a single bird. Late in the afternoon, while dragging a box of yellowed curtains toward the trash pile, I noticed a door I hadn't seen before. It was at the back of the hallway, half hidden behind a shelving unit stacked with old paint cans. The handle was rusted, the frame warped, and when I tried it, the door wouldn't budge. At first, I thought it was just swollen wood, the kind that sticks after years of humidity. But the more I pushed, the more it felt deliberate, like it wasn't meant to open. Claire came over, wiping sweat from her forehead, and asked what I was doing. When I pointed it out, she frowned. "Was that on the floor plan?" she asked. I shook my head. Neither of us remembered any mention of a basement in the listing. It took us nearly an hour to drag the shelving unit out of the way and pry the door open. The wood splintered around the hinges, and when it finally gave, a blast of damp, stale air poured out. A set of narrow stairs descended into darkness, the kind that swallowed the beam of my flashlight as soon as I flicked it on. Claire hesitated at the top, hugging her arms, but I felt pulled down by curiosity. Each step creaked under my weight, the air thick with mildew and something metallic, almost like pennies left to rot in water. When the light finally cut through the gloom, my excitement drained. The basement stretched wider than I expected, and along the walls stood rows of cots, rusted frames, thin-stained mattresses, and chains bolted into the concrete beside them. Claire whispered my name, her voice thin and tight, as if speaking too loudly would wake something. I walked deeper, kicking aside empty bottles and scraps of clothing that looked decades old. Shoes, children's backpacks, even a cracked plastic lunchbox with faded cartoon stickers still clinging to the side. None of it made sense. It wasn't just storage. It looked like people had been kept down here. I kept turning in slow circles, the flashlight beam bouncing across the walls, until it caught on something that made me stop. A section of the floor scarred with deep scratches, as if someone had dragged heavy furniture or tried to claw their way across the concrete. That image stuck with me, and for the first time since we bought the place, I wanted nothing more than to leave. We didn't say much after that. We climbed out of the basement in silence, shut the door as best we could, and pushed the shelving unit back in front of it. Neither of us wanted to sit with the questions that were now screaming in our heads. Who built that basement like that? Why wasn't it mentioned in the listing? And whose belongings had been left behind? Claire suggested calling the realtor, but it was late, and I just wanted to eat something and crash on the couch. We tried to carry on as if it was just another weird discovery in an old house, but the unease clung to us like a bad smell. Even while cooking dinner, I kept glancing toward the hallway, half expecting the door to creak open on its own. That night, we set up our sleeping bags in the living room since the bedrooms still needed work. The house was eerily still, only the faint lapping of the lake against the shore seeping through the windows. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of crunching gravel outside. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a raccoon rummaging near the trash. But then I saw Claire sitting up, wide-eyed, staring toward the curtains. The crunching wasn't random. It was steady, deliberate, like footsteps circling the house. I held my breath, straining to listen, and realized whoever it was had stopped in the yard, just beyond the window. The curtain swayed slightly, and for the first time all day, I wished we had never bought the place. I whispered to Claire not to move, and we both stayed completely still. Minutes passed, but the presence outside didn't fade. Then came the unmistakable sound of the back gate creaking open. Whoever it was, they weren't just passing through. They were on the property. I grabbed the heavy flashlight we had left near the couch and edged toward the window, careful not to step on the squeaky floorboard by the door. Through a tiny gap in the curtain, I saw a figure moving across the yard, carrying something long and metallic. The weak glow from the porch light caught just enough detail. A crowbar. Panic surged through me. Claire reached for her phone, but there was no signal this far out. We hadn't thought to hook up Wi-Fi yet. The only option was to stay quiet and hope whoever it was left on their own. But then the figure stopped near the basement window, crouching as if inspecting it. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it filled the whole room. I imagined them realizing the door upstairs had been forced and deciding to come inside to check what we had seen. The thought of confronting whoever used that basement for God knows what nearly made me sick. I motioned for Claire to follow me, and we slipped toward the front door. The hinges screeched faintly as I opened it, and I prayed the intruder hadn't heard. Barefoot, we sprinted down the gravel driveway, not daring to look back, the flashlight beam bouncing wildly over the ground. My car was parked just off the road, and fumbling with the keys felt like it took forever. When the engine finally roared to life, Claire begged me to just drive. Anywhere. As we pulled away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The figure had turned from the basement and now stood in the yard, facing the house, completely still. We didn't stop until we reached the next town over, where we parked in the lot of a 24-hour diner. Neither of us could get the words out at first. Eventually, we called the county sheriff and reported what we'd found, along with the man on the property. By the time deputies went out there, the house was empty. They never found the intruder, and when they searched the basement, all the belongings, cots, and chains had been cleared out. To this day, I don't understand how someone emptied that place so quickly or why it was hidden in the first place. All I know is, we never went back and the lake house is still standing there, probably holding secrets I never want to uncover.